For as long as I can remember, Need for Speed has always had a problem with its identity. The first game's full name was actually Road and Tracks Need for Speed, and it worked closely with the magazine of the same name. While the game would definitely be considered primitive by today's standards, back in the day it was actually quite impressive, and you couldn't really get an experience like that unless you went to an arcade machine. The first game was solely marketed at car enthusiasts, the type of people who would flip open a magazine and look at a car's performance information and maybe the history and the backstory. Fast forward 10 years, and the series has completely abandoned the supercar aesthetics and has gone after the tuner crowd instead. Need for Speed went from making fun of tuner car culture to completely embracing it within only a short time span. Ironically, the games focused on tuner cars were much more popular than the games ever were in the 90s, and the series pretty much made it its mainstay. Well, only 7 years after that, the series did a complete return to form and focused on gameplay that would be reminiscent of the first couple games in the series, albeit with a much more simplified handling model to appeal to wider audiences. And that's not to mention the multiple racing sims and festival racers in between. Well, today, I wanted to look at a truly retro game and look at what I think is the penultimate Need for Speed game of the 90s. That game would be the PlayStation 1 version of Need for Speed High Stakes. It was one of the first few racing games I played along with Gran Turismo 2. And no, I'm not that old, I just grew up broke. Like I said earlier, Need for Speed never really knew what it wanted to be, so the PS1 and the PC version of High Stakes are completely different games. The PlayStation version is a simcade game where you have to worry about racing lines and braking properly, and most of the vehicle speeds are actually quite realistic. The PC version, on the other hand, has a complete arcade handling model where it's really easy to go around corners. You don't really have to worry about actual racecraft much, if at all.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
The changes don't stop there. Some cars are completely different between versions or flat out missing, and the game is just presented in a completely different way. When I first played the PC version, I was so confused why the game had a McLaren F1 LM instead of the long tail like in the PS1 version. And considering both games have the CLK GTR, why would they change this at all? And then, whenever you look at a vehicle showcase on the PS1 version, it's rendered in the engine, but on the PC version, it's a slideshow. Well, if you grew up playing the PC version, you could make an argument that the arcade physics and the different PC changes are actually better, and you're not sure why the PS1 version is so strange, and both arguments are completely valid. But then, you have to consider the fact that in Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, the PS1 version has arcade physics, and the PC version is the simcade version. What were they thinking?
What were they thinking?
I am also just kinda shocked they thought it would be a better idea to put the simcade handling model on the PS1 version of the game. I would think that would be the more casual platform if anything. Well, that's enough preamble. What actually makes High Stakes so encapsulating to play? While the game does have a somewhat outdated design philosophy, the game surprisingly feels very modern to play. The game's presentation is unmatched. It's perhaps one of the most Y2K racing games you can play, period. The intro cinematic cutscene shown at the beginning of the game is one of the best I've seen of any racing game to this day.
To this day! To this day!
The trance music combined with the CG graphics kinda makes it feel like the first few seasons of Initial D. It's pretty obvious that 911 is the star of the show, but every single car has an amazing on-screen presence, even the tuner car at the start of the race. Every single time I launch the game, I watch this cutscene, and I think this is one of the first few things that make me start really liking cars. And then, when you actually get to the main menu, it's not so much just a regular UI, but it's more like a digital interface. People argue if Hot Pursuit 2, or Most Wanted, or Pro Street has the best soundtrack, but if you like trance music, High Stakes is probably the best. And the main menu itself reminds you of a different era. The default option isn't actually the career mode, it's to test drive a car. Then you have the single player and then the Hot Pursuit mode. The actual single player component is pretty far down the list. Yeah, back then, you were expected to play a game over and over and over again, even if it only had a couple hours of content. The gameplay sandbox was supposed to be enough. We'll touch on the other modes later, but I mainly want to focus on the tournament mode. The single player campaign is actually structured pretty uniquely, and I can't think of any other game that actually mirrors the same design philosophy. You enter tournaments that range from 3 to 7 races, and you have to select one car you use for the entire tournament. You can't change halfway through. The starting cars have to be some of the most unique starting car choices I've seen in any racing game. You have the choice of the BMW Z3 and the Mercedes SLK 230, and it's kinda hard to believe these cars are as old as they are. And whenever you go to buy a car, you can see a showcase that gives you a brief history and some of the stats of the actual car in real life.
Mercedes-Benz has built many legendary sports cars over the years, but the all-new SLK 230 is possibly the most innovative of them all.
As a kid, this is how I mostly learned about cars. I was only about 3 or 4 years old, and I would watch these cutscenes over and over and over again trying to learn about the different cars in real life. I had a ton of Hot Wheels, so I would remember holding up the Hot Wheels of the car to the screen while he talks about the information in the game. One of the earliest pictures I've seen of myself is me in front of the screen looking at the showcase of the 911. Yeah, if you like watching Motor Week retro videos, these are kind of like a dream come true. And then, when you actually buy the car, you realize that you can upgrade it. Yeah, you can upgrade the grip, aerodynamics, and acceleration. And when you eventually do have enough money to actually upgrade your car, you get visual changes. If you upgrade the grip, you can get new wheels, or the acceleration upgrade can actually change your hood, and aerodynamics can alter spoilers. I find that very impressive for a game marketing itself as an arcade racer. And then, when you finally get in game, you're introduced to a really weighty handling model that punishes every single mistake that you make. It's not super realistic, but it's probably as close as you're gonna get to Gran Turismo in the same time period. Let me put it this way, when you're driving the cars in the game, it gives you the feeling and the sensation that you really are maneuvering a really stable, high-performance machine. The problem is one wrong move or one miscalculation, and you're off in the ditch or hitting a wall. And your car can get damaged, and this isn't just visual. When you're out of the race, you have to pay for repairs. At the beginning, it's not too bad, and the repairs are usually a couple $100, but once you're driving $250,000 Ferraris, a bad crash can set you back $57K. If you race cleanly, you actually get a bonus, but I actually found this extremely hard to do, no matter how good of a driver you are. So if you crash, not only are you losing out on the clean racing bonus, but you're also having to pay out of pocket for repairs. It's a double whammy. It's entirely possible that if you have a bad series of races where you keep almost totaling your car, you can pretty much soft lock your game and you have to either grind races for hours to get enough money or just start over completely. I'm not kidding when I say you almost have to treat the game like you're playing Dark Souls 1 Life. If you crash, your run could just be over. Okay, it's not that bad. The game doesn't autosave, so you can just reload a previous checkpoint, but if you're a decent driver and you don't make too many serious errors, you should be okay, especially if you do the extra events in the game. So how's the actual racing? The AI themselves are extremely aggressive and they are very competitive. The problem is, they cheat. There's been multiple times where the AI set a lap that are multiple seconds faster than the lap record. But then, on other races, you can legitimately drive away from them and get a multiple second lead. It's just inconsistent enough to make you question yourself. But I would say a majority of the time, the AI provide a legitimately good challenge, and if you keep making a lot of mistakes, you probably aren't going to win the event. You have to drive somewhat cleanly to actually win the race. The crazy thing is, when everything's working as it's supposed to, it kinda reminded me of Ridge Racer Type 4, even though the game's handling model is much more realistic. It gave me that same feeling of not knowing if I could even catch the AI at all. That's probably one of the best compliments I can give to the game overall, because Ridge Racer Type 4 is one of the best arcade racing games. In fact, this is one of the few games released in the same time period that can match that game's vibes, and it wasn't actually released by a Japanese developer. The single player component of this game is just really enjoyable, and I was actually pretty surprised at just how challenging it was. There were multiple races where I came in second, third, or even fourth place, which is pretty surprising to me. That doesn't really happen to me in most other racing games. I recently played Midnight Club 2 on the hardest difficulty, and this game's challenge was on a pretty similar level half the time. But when everything comes together and you get that clean racing bonus after hitting all your racing lines, it's really satisfying. For such a mainstream racing game, I'm kinda surprised how much High Stakes punishes risk and forces you to pay attention. I found that in pretty much every Need for Speed game after this, once you get to be a decent driver, there's never really too much challenge with the game, but no matter how many times I play High Stakes, I always find it a very challenging experience that forces you to pay attention at all times. I remember when I originally played the game, I didn't have a memory card, so every time I started playing the game, I had to start the tournament mode over again. In the championship series with the Aston Martin, the M5, and the XKR, I legitimately couldn't get past that as a kid. And even now, all these years later, I struggle immensely with the championship with the Corvette and the Ferrari 550. After the first two championships, the game's difficulty is genuinely baffling sometimes. You drive as fast as you possibly can, and it's just not enough. I can pretty confidently say that every single Need for Speed game after this one is magnitudes easier. But the game isn't perfect, far from it in fact. There's a couple things that really date the experience. I think my main problem with the championship mode is the track variety. Every time you do a new championship, you'd race a new track as the last race in the championship. This means that whenever you start the next championship, you race the same tracks for the first couple races, and then you get to experience the new one at the end. You could probably finish the main tournament mode in 3 hours, so it's kind of amazing that they somehow made it feel repetitive at all. Also, the PS1 version's handling isn't perfect. There's a couple problems where whenever you take jumps, it just feels really awkward, especially when you land, and whenever you turn in sometimes, your car doesn't turn in as much as it should. I realized towards the end of the game that turning the thumbstick slightly actually helped with this, so I'm wondering if the game's handling model was set up for a wheel or something. Whenever you turn the thumbstick all the way to the left or the right, you get a lot of vibration, and I think this means that you're overdriving the car. The problem is some PS1 controllers back in the day just didn't have analog sticks, so I'm not sure how that was supposed to work. And not only do the AI cheat, but passing them is somewhat tense because they drive all over the road. Again, it gave me Ridge Racer Type 4 flashbacks. But that's really it for my complaints, honestly. I mean, when I really think about this, I think this game has less flaws than a lot of Need for Speed games that came out after it. Back to glazing the game, and I gotta say, the engine audio might be the best engine audio of any racing game on the PS1. The worst part is the next game in the series, Hot Pursuit 2, has a worse engine audio. They honestly should have just reused the files, especially considering a lot of the same cars are in both games. And despite this game being older than I am, a lot of the times when I'm driving on some of the coastal highways of the game, I'm actually taken aback with how breathtaking it is. This might not sound too logical to say, but whenever you drive through a tunnel and you see the reflections of the lights in the car's paint, it's honestly more impressive to me that that's happening on a PS1 than a modern game's reflections happening on a PS5. And some of the sunsets, and especially the nighttime, are some of the most breathtaking visuals you'll ever see on the PS1. The whole game has this really cool, cozy Y2K atmosphere. I remember I showed this game to someone who really liked Most Wanted and Carbon, and they watched the game for a couple minutes, and they were kind of taken aback. They could tell it was a prequel to Hot Pursuit 2, but they were kind of surprised. The game has a more futuristic presentation, and somehow it feels more modern than Hot Pursuit 2 despite being an older game on an older console. Now, as you progress through the championships, nothing prepares you for the final one. You finally get to choose between the McLaren F1 and the CLK GTR. Since I didn't have a memory card playing the game as a kid, I didn't see these championships until much later. I thought you were just gonna race around the same environments but in much faster cars, but imagine my shock when I realized you actually just go around racetracks. No, seriously, it's got a pit area, it's got rumble strips, crowds, sponsors, everything you would expect. Obviously, the layouts are fictional and they would never pass regulation, and luckily the Mercedes CLR isn't in the game so it doesn't go flying off into space.
What you say? That you only meant well, 'cause you did. What you say?
But yeah, you get to race around multiple racetracks, and this is where the game really starts feeling like Ridge Racer Type 4. The difficulty here is insane, and even if you start in first place, you're not safe. You could easily lose the lead. Now, the interesting thing is since these cars are actually somewhat realistic with the stats, their top speed is actually somewhat lower than the cars you were just driving. The McLaren especially has a really long first gear, so they don't actually accelerate that fast either, but they handle extremely well. They have a ton of downforce, and half the times, you don't even have to hit the brakes, you just have to let off or coast. Once you memorize the track layouts, you can really put down some pretty fun laps, but the problem is if you make a mistake or if you crash, it's going to take a while to get up to speed again, so it really penalizes you. In order to use these cars in the other modes, you have to finish the championship mode, so there's no way to practice. When I first played the game without a memory card, these cars were like a mythical legend to me. I never knew how they drove, how they sounded. I just watched the showcases over and over again and memorized the stats, and if I did have a memory card, I didn't know which one I actually wanted to buy. I always thought the McLaren was cooler, but not by much. So once you finish the championship mode and you find a way to cool yourself off, what are the other game modes like? As a kid, pretty much the main thing that I would do is the Hot Pursuit mode, and it would really piss my mom off with all the sirens, but that's besides the point. I remember the single player being fun, but the real fun is when you do the split screen multiplayer. Not only are you trying to race each other, which is fun in and of itself because you got that competitive aspect and you're right next to each other smack talking each other, but then you have to avoid the police, which are probably some of the most vicious police in any game I've ever seen. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say the cops in this game make the cops in Most Wanted look like recruits. I remember when I first played Most Wanted, I found the cop chases to be somewhat busy work. I found them kind of boring because I found them pretty easy and I only ever got busted due to my own hubris. Years later, hearing online discussion about the game and hearing people say the cops are the best part about the game and they're so hard to get away from, I was like, what are you guys talking about? And now, I finally realized the reason why. The cops in High Stakes are 10 times worse.
Don't tase me, bro! Don't tase me! I didn't do anything! Ow! Ow! Ow!
This was a case of going back and playing a game you haven't played in a couple of decades and wondering how you were able to play it at all. It took me over 5 attempts to do one Hot Pursuit race, and that was on the easiest difficulty. how did I do this consistently as a kid? I remember playing the Hot Pursuit race for fun. In the slower cars, like the Camaro, it's not too bad, but if you're driving a 911 or a McLaren, good luck, buddy. I seriously cannot remember the last time I had to lock in this much for a racing game. I didn't even try it on the hardest difficulty. I know I'm not going to be able to do it. So yeah, if you thought Midnight Club 2 was too easy, go play the Hot Pursuit mode in High Stakes. You also got single race, which is pretty self-explanatory, but I gotta complain about the test drive feature. For some reason, this turns on the traffic and there's no way to turn it off. I wanted to test drive cars to see which one was faster before I bought it because apparently you need all the help you can get in this game. And then you also have these special events which are unlocked as you do more tournaments. These make it a lot easier to make some extra money, and they actually have some pretty decent variety. They change the order in which you do the race layouts, which makes them a lot more varied than the actual championships. Also, some of them have modifiers, like you can only be in a fully upgraded car, or there's traffic, or it's going to be raining the whole time. And yeah, this game has dynamic weather. In one race, it started raining, and towards the end of it, it was just damp. Any game advertising dynamic weather after the year 2000 is a straight up scam. So that's the PS1 version of High Stakes, easily one of the best racing games available for that console. It has a really cool car list, which is a retro throwback by this point, varied environments that make it feel like a globe-trotting adventure, manual transmission options, and the game has assists, but they're turned off by default. Also, the soundtrack and atmosphere is unmatched, almost literally. I can't think of any other racing game that has a similar presentation style. Also, it just has a ton of nice little neat touches that most people wouldn't even notice, like the police being different in every single country, or same with your speedometer. In some countries it's miles and others it's kilometers an hour. I never really had a problem converting miles to kilometers, and I honestly think this game is one of the reasons. And every car has its own speedometer, just like Test Drive Unlimited, but this game predates that franchise by almost a decade. I also really like how the speedometer follows the needle of the tach. It doesn't just show you the whole thing. I don't know why, but it's a really neat touch, and again, I haven't seen this in any other racing game. And then, on top of all this, there's vehicle customization, and I honestly feel like this game could come out a decade later and nobody would have batted an eye. It definitely could have used some more content, but honestly, I much prefer playing this game than to Hot Pursuit 2010. So I can wholeheartedly recommend the PS1 version of the game, but I wanted to circle back to the PC version. In a vacuum, there's nothing wrong with it, and in fact, there's actually quite a few nice additions the game has. Pretty much any PC repack you find of the game nowadays has a ton of extra cars that I didn't even know were in the game. Stuff like the Ferrari 360, the R34 Skyline, and even some of the Australian muscle cars. Considering some of the categories of vehicles in this game only have 2 options, having some extra actually is a big help. You also almost have 30 years of mod support, so there's a ton of extra cars if the vanilla options aren't enough. Honestly, if your main goal is to have fun and to absorb the atmosphere of the game, the PC version might be the better option. I personally think the UI presentation is a little bit weaker on the PC version, but the music is still there, which is one of the most important aspects. But honestly, I got kinda bored with the driving. I just didn't have a lot of fun going around the same tracks I memorized over and over again, in cars that felt like they were driving themselves. I also find that PC version's graphics don't have nearly as much charm as the distortion from the PS1 version. Honestly, the Y2K car list just feels at home with the PS1 dithering. But both versions of the game are only a couple hundred megabytes. I would recommend that try them both out and see which one you prefer. But the overall verdict of Need for Speed High Stakes is it's almost a shame playing this game. It provides a genuinely good challenge with a lot of the Need for Speed series' best aspects still intact. So much so that Hot Pursuit 2010, which is pretty much the exact same gameplay formula, got remastered over a decade after that with pretty much no changes, and it still felt like a modern game. But then you go play something like Need for Speed The Run, and it feels like this antiquated relic from a bygone era that no one should ever return to. Despite that game being like 2.5 hours long, it took me a week to finish it because I just couldn't stomach the game for more than 15 minutes, but I could pretty comfortably play Need for Speed High Stakes for hours at a time. And even when you're done with the racing, you can just sit back at the main menu and enjoy the ambiance.